Let me see. I think I'm live.
What
Yeah,
is
I think
going
I'm
on
live now.
YouTube? So
All right. All right, let me.
what's it doing?
Okay. You guys can still hear me, right?
Yeah, everything's good.
Yeah.
All right. Just trying to go onto YouTube. Still not loaded yet. My live stream. Oh, now it is. Just so I can have like the chat thing on my phone. Anyways. All right. Guess we're ready to start, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Good evening, everybody. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our live stream tonight, August 1st, 2024. Lots to go over. We're doing a live tropical weather outlook instead of, just a regular recorded video. We have a lot to go over tonight, including Invest 97L. We got also some things we might look at in the Eastern Pacific too, since they're quite active right now. But we're also going to really focus tonight on the future of the hurricane season beyond 97L, but also the state of ENSO right now, El Nino, La Nina, ENSO neutral, and also predictions too. So hope you can all join, and if you are new to the channel, you're just seeing me for the first time, would appreciate it if you like, comment, subscribe, all the the regular stuff. And yeah, hopefully we can have a good time on this live stream. I have some people, some of my friends with me tonight. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
I'm Danny. Weather Hub TV. Hope y'all have a good evening.
Hey, hello everyone. I'm Nathan. WX Nate on Twitter. Well, X now. Um, hope we can have a great discussion.
Hopefully, yeah. So we're gonna talk about 97L. And there's actually just mentioned this to Danny like right when we first started calling, but with 97L now, there's actually a state of emergency issued for Florida just not long ago because of 97L. If you guys didn't know that. Um,
Oh,
yeah, they're definitely
is
taking
that
this
recent?
serious.
As
Say,
of the new advisory,
um,
or not advisory, but as of the new outlook.
yeah, like they issued it, I think just half an hour ago, the state of emergency for Florida.
Okay.
So it was very recent. So they're definitely taking this very seriously in Florida. Um, I mean, this is going to be a pretty decent threat to Florida. All the models seem to think that the western coast, especially in the eastern Gulf, is where 97L will probably end up. Looking at some of the modeling, and actually, we do really quickly want to show you here, just to kind of prove that a state of emergency has been issued. Here it is. Um, I'm actually kind of surprised by this, though. I don't know what you guys think about it, but it's kind of interesting.
I am. When you told me about it in the call before like this started, I was very surprised. I mean, I live in Florida, I didn't even know, but like I was not expecting this until they were gonna do it like a day or two from now. No, not today. Honestly,
Yeah, no,
I'm pretty surprised.
yeah, I thought that they would do it when this would already be designated as a system. But, I guess they're just doing precautionary measures, especially because it seems like there's a lot of certainty that this will, um, indeed. It looks like Florida is the main area that we're looking at right now with potential impacts. And so let's actually take a look at the National Hurricane Center, the latest tropical weather outlook. As of today, as of 2 p.m., now a 70% chance of formation. It is obviously Invest 97L, and even the National Hurricane Center says that interests across the Greater Antilles, so that means, Jamaica, not Jamaica, Cuba, Haiti, and Dominican Republic, where this tropical wave is right now. The Bahamas and Florida should continue to monitor the progress. So definitely looks like this thing is eyeing itself on Florida. But really quickly though, let's venture into the Eastern Pacific because it looks like there's a lot happening in the Eastern Pacific too, although nothing is of direct threat to any land. Finally, I guess, especially since, the Eastern Pacific has not gotten much of any sort of sizable activity at all so far this season.
Uh, um, NHC expects Carlotta to become the first hurricane season. I mean, hurricane of this season. And should that happen, I believe it will happen in short time. And it would be the second latest first hurricane of any epoch season on record.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been pretty inactive, record inactive actually in that basin. But the next probably 10 to 15 days should have a good amount of activity.
Yeah. Um, Let me see. The forecast, I think, I lost it, but the forecast for Carlota, I think, is up to um 100 miles an hour, so Cat 2. So they expect this to become a decent hurricane. But I
It's been a
guess,
while.
yeah, it's definitely been a while. The first storm formed in May. Not in May, July. Well, the Pacific starts in May, but the first storm this year formed in July with Aletta,
Yeah,
and that was record. That was record
yeah. I think
late.
it beat the record by a day. Yeah, I think so. I think the previous latest first storm formed on July 3. I don't remember what year, and I think Aletta this year was on July 4, if I remember correctly.
I think 2016 with Agatha in the Eastern Pacific is the record before this year, but then Aletta broke it. But yeah,
Oh, okay.
So yeah, Cat 2 is expected from Aletta, so that's not really much of, but it's gonna be out to sea, so that's not really much of a concern. Um,
Yeah.
but there's another area to the southwest of that is a high chance as well. This will probably get an invest, I assume. I think the next one is 96E. This will probably get an invest very soon. And this will also probably become a pretty decent hurricane. So I guess the Eastern Pacific is making up for lost time now, is it?
Yeah, it
Pretty
was like
much in
overdue.
that sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
By the way, what time does NHC have um Carlotta peaking as I had to?
Let me see that actually. I think it's. Let me see the forecast discussion. 36, 36 hours. 36 to 48 hours is when they show 100 miles an hour. So
So that's about Saturday morning or sometime on Saturday.
yeah, I think so.
Sometime on Saturday.
Hmm.
I was just wondering because it seems like the relative humidity in its environment is probably going to keep it a little lower than expected in terms of wind speed. I'm
Yeah.
not sure what the models have now regarding that because yesterday it seemed like it would do pretty well to kind of lock out the dry air. But it's pretty clear that so far it hasn't been able to do that. So maybe it just needs more time.
Yeah, I actually saw this morning somebody was mentioning about dry air intrusions into Carlota. And by the way, on the screen, I do have a satellite of the Atlantic and Eastern Pacific, and you can see Carlota. In the last few hours, though, it's actually had pretty decent convective bursts near the center. So I guess it's trying to now actually, consolidate. But you can see to the west
Yeah,
northwest the general environment just by looking at the infrared satellite, not even the water vapor. You could already see that it's pretty dry. So this is definitely going to
yeah,
have just drier surroundings to work with, and I mean, I still think this is gonna be a hurricane. I don't know about you guys.
yeah. I believe
Yeah.
it's to be a hurricane.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm not I'm not so confident about a cat 2, however. But considering the core of the system will probably be small
hmm
once it starts to fire solid VHTs in its core, I think it should be okay. I
yeah,
think that rapid intensification is probably still possible between tomorrow and Saturday. But yeah, I'm not too confident about a cat 2 just yet.
yeah. Now let me really quickly bring up satellite of Carlota specifically. It's actually already trying to do these convective bursts near its in its center. So we'll see what
It's
that.
I think
trying.
he's been trying to do that since last night, actually. Because I went to bed with it having some very small VHTs, but it seems like dry air kept those actually wrapping up an eye, at least for now.
hmm Yeah. You got anything to say about it, Danny?
Um, I mean, I think it's probably gonna be a hurricane for sure. I have a feeling that at the very minimum, it's probably gonna be 90 miles per hour. Like that's like the low end. Like if it failed to the most it possibly could, probably 90 miles per hour. But it could be if it overachieve. Honestly, a Cat 3, a brief Cat 3, maybe not impossible. Maybe not impossible if it successfully does the rapid intensification the right way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it's really not broad at all. It's a pretty compact system.
It is very small.
And
And it got even
yeah,
smaller from yesterday, I think, to today. So, I mean, that's partially because of dry air, I think, but it did get smaller, so it's
yeah, I
gonna,
think the dry is keeping it from expanding too much.
yeah. hmm Right. But it's gonna try anyways. But other than that, so that's basically everything that's going on in the Pacific. Let's now shift to the Atlantic, where things are a million times more complicated, especially with uh 97 now. Um, Actually, the satellite, I'm gonna say, I believe honestly that it ain't looking too bad. It's just dealing with a whole bunch of islands with Hispaniola. It has some decent vorticity, but it's just dealing with land interaction right now. Convection, lots of convection blowing up right now on the southern side, especially south of Hispaniola or near the southern part of Haiti. But the latest GFS, and I was just talking about this with Danny before we came on, the latest GFS is actually taking the main vorticity north, or it's trying to keep this kind of north weighted and then bring this into the Gulf right near the west coast of Florida.
So is it that it kind of takes the vortex along the northern coast of Cuba rather than the southern coast?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And let me actually, and we could actually see the vorticity right now. Um, actually, the vorticity seems to be very centered right over Hispaniola. I'm interested to see though this interaction because we got to. I think the biggest key will be how much interaction with Hispaniola kind of does in terms of consolidating the vorticity, and also with
Yeah,
Cuba
yeah.
too. Is the I forget, but is the southern part of Cuba the part that's more mountainous, or is it the one that's closer, the western, the more skinny part?
I believe it's quite mountainous on both ends. Let me just check it real quick. I believe the area just north of Jamaica is pretty mountainous.
Yeah.
I think Eastern
Um,
Cuba is pretty mountainous.
Eastern.
yeah, the greatest expanse of mountains is the area north of Jamaica. Yeah,
Oh,
that's
so the
southern southeast side.
southeast side of
Yeah,
Cuba. Yeah, I want to see
Yeah.
how land interaction helps with consolidating of Wort Max, either on the northern side or the southern side, because I've seen a lot of models very suggestive of, and I'm actually going to bring this up first before I bring sea surface temperatures, but I've seen quite a few models, especially the H-Wharf and the halves models, I
It,
think, bring this more weighted towards the southern part of Cuba, while the GFS kind of, well, the main track of the GFS is right through Cuba, but I feel like they try to make it northerly weighted.
oh, okay.
the ensembles have also like the GFS. They have shifted like to the east, more to the east this run. Like most of the ensembles take it like over like Sarasota and Tampa this run.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, that part of the Gulf, though, in general, it's not going to have a lot of time, I think, as or not as much time if it moves straight into Southwest Florida. But I have the sea surface temperatures here. There's actually a 32 Celsius, I think, just off the Tampa coast, right near Tampa. There's a 32 Celsius marking. I have the CDAS map up. So the Gulf in general, and widespread 30s and even 31s throughout most of the eastern northern Gulf as well. So this has lots of energy to work with in the eastern Gulf. And I think the biggest confusion and the kind of biggest complicated factor with 97L right now is how where it stalls, because a lot of models kind of indicate that once it moves into Florida, it's either going to stall or it's going to move to the southeastern stall, or some models, or at least the GFS yesterday was kind of doing it where they barely move it into Florida and then they just stall it and kind of do some weird things and then bring it back out into the eastern Gulf. It's very complicated, but especially I think honestly, if this especially weights itself into the eastern Gulf. Off the southeast too, it's also very warm with 29s and even some 30s. But especially in the eastern Gulf, 30s, 31s widespread and probably very, very high upper ocean heat content. That just spells, in my opinion, prime conditions for rapid intensification.
Right.
Let me actually
Yeah,
see.
I think it's a pretty dangerous situation about to unfold for Florida. If this does um if it's able to create a solid vortex from early on, like right after it leaves Cuba. Because if it should make use of its environment, I don't think there's much stopping it from being a solid hurricane, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think RH is going to be pretty decent. It already has a ULAC over it, and that should follow it all the way up till possible landfall. Well, probably likely landfall at this point. We already mentioned SSTs, so I mean, I think there isn't really a good case for Florida right now because, like, regardless of development, it's still going to be a serious flooding threat.
Hmm.
So I think, in a way, probably the only thing they can hope for is that somehow the vortex doesn't um form quickly and it probably doesn't like become a TC until close to landfall. But other than that, it seems like a pretty dangerous situation for Florida about to unfold.
Yeah. There's recon, I think, scheduled very soon for 97 now. I'm not sure if it's for tomorrow or so, but I think there's recon apparently gonna be
I'm
happening
gonna
very
check.
soon.
I'm gonna check the plan real quick
Yeah.
because I believe there's supposed to be something today, but I'm not exactly sure. Um,
Danny, what are your
they
thoughts
may have.
though on 97 now with what it could do? Because I just looked at the latest GFS, by the way, that's loaded out to the next 6 days. And it seems like they kind of do the better case solution maybe for Florida, where they develop this, but then they quickly move this across Florida, and then instead of stalling it over Florida or over land, they kind of stall this off the southeast coast. But because of that, they make this a pretty significant hurricane. Let me see, what's the intensity? 976 millibars, so a pretty decent hurricane. And as I just mentioned, it's pretty warm off the southeast coast along the Gulf Stream as well.
I feel like it depends where that vortice forms. If it forms north of Cuba, or like the main part forms north of Cuba, and it takes what the GFS is doing now, I feel that starting the stalling part will probably happen more so around the Carolinas and stuff. Like who knows if it actually goes into the Carolinas or just goes parks itself just in the Gulf Stream waters. But if theoretically like the southern vortex went south of Cuba, if it took like the south of Cuba route, like the H-Orf and HAFS model have, then I feel like it might be more like it might park itself in the Gulf more likely than not. You know, like when the ridge comes in, it has more of a chance to stall all over the Gulf. So we have to watch that. You know, it may have more time over the waters in the Gulf of Mexico, which are the warmest in the basin right now. So in terms of like an intensity factor, I think it will be worse for Florida if it takes the southern Cuba route.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. With the Carolinas thing though, they kind of looking by the latest GFS, they kind of park it off the southeast coast and then eventually slowly inch it into the southeast. The whole steering kind of thing though behind this is really a huge mystery, but wherever this stalls, especially if this stalls over land, that's going to mean at least somebody is probably going to be getting lots of rain. And I'd imagine either way, if this takes the GFS solution, let me actually see how much total precipitation there is. There's already right up along the coast still lots of rain expected. And even if this doesn't directly stall over Florida, the GFS still has rain totals up over half an inch, over half a foot, not half an inch, half a foot in some areas of south and western Florida peninsula. Not western Florida as in the Panhandle, but the western peninsula. Um, and I actually wonder, and this is a really big curious thing about mine, is how much the really warm sea surface temperatures are going to play into obviously more quake intensification, but extra moisture for rainfall. Because you got to keep that in
Right,
mind too.
right,
Because I mean, taking things into perspective, the JFS has already portrayed a number of different solutions that would be pretty bad for a whole number of states. And when you consider that the JFS has a slight cold SST bias, and it also tends to underestimate RH a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that what we're seeing on the model is probably a more, how do you call it now? I feel like the situations that it shows would be worse in real life than what the model is advertising.
Yeah.
right. I
Because,
agree.
yeah, because really and truly, if if the system does have a solid vortex and it is over 31 Celsius waters with a ULOC for, what is this, like 2 days?
Hmm.
Like, we've seen that situation before. You know what kind of problem that can cause. So
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, overall, we just have to hope that somehow something goes wrong when it goes into the Gulf, because really and truly right now it's looking a bit ominous in different ways for different states.
Yeah. And then we have the European solution, which I'm going to go over really quickly before I then go on to, the other part of what I want to do tonight, which is kind of look forward with, predictions and stuff for the season as a whole. And I'm actually interested what your opinions are about that. But the European, I think, is probably the worst case scenario for the Carolinas, and also pretty bad still for Florida. But especially for the Carolinas, because they have this thing where they also show the GFS solution, but it kind of begins to stall as it's exiting Florida off to the southeast, and then it just parks right off the southeast coast for seems like 2 or 3 days, and before it finally kind of edges its way into South Carolina. And the total precipitation from that, the total accumulated precipitation up to 10 days, right up against the Carolinas coast, is some places is as much as 20, even more in inches. So that's like 2 feet of rain, and that is pretty significant.
I think that's the main problem with this storm. The main situation. I feel like maybe partially the reason why they pulled the trigger of the state of emergency for Florida is because of that potential flooding threat that might ensue, regardless if this becomes a significant storm or not. Like I think that could be a reason why, for sure, is
Yeah,
the
I
flooding.
think it's a
Pretty
good
widespread too.
move from them. Yeah, I think that's a good decision from them in that regard, because it's pretty clear that models are calling for either a slow moving system or a system that just completely parked itself over the southeastern US.
Yeah, somewhere in the southeast. And it could be more than just Florida too. It could be the Carolinas, or if, somehow we go
Or
back
Georgia.
to, yeah, or Georgia, or if we go back to what the GFS solutions were showing yesterday, which was including the Gulf, then that would mean more like Western Florida, including Panhandle and Alabama, Mississippi. So everywhere along the
Yeah,
southeast. Yeah,
even Louisiana, potentially.
yeah. I think that would especially be if this takes more of the southern route. So there's
Yeah.
a lot to, a lot to go over.
You have to take this by day process because, like, I feel like I thought honestly yesterday I thought that by today we would kind of know what this would do, but this hasn't been the case. It's just been a mystery the whole time. Does it go to the Gulf and stay there, or would it go more to the northern route and just park off the East Coast? Like the whoever gets the most rain is still not known. Like no one really knows right now, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Nobody
that's true.
knows.
That's true.
hmm I'm pretty confident there will probably be at least somebody that gets a buttload of rain from this, and that'll be a pretty big threat in and of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we got 97L out of the way, or at least the best we could do in terms of talking about it for now, because there's still so much that needs to be cleared up in terms of 97L. So let's move on to what the state of the hurricane season is for now, and let's really quickly go over what we've had so far this season. We've had Alberto, Beryl, and Chris. We've had three named storms so far. One of them being Category 5 Hurricane Beryl. Let's actually really quickly refresh your minds if you guys watching forgot. Beryl was a major hurricane, struck the southern Lesser Antilles as a Cat 4, I think, in Grenada.
Yeah.
Really devastating storm. Forgot the specific island that it hit though. But it then hit.
I think it was Kariakou.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the southernmost of the Grenadines, the archipelago.
yeah. Was 150-mile-per-hour landfall. I think the worst they got.
Yeah.
It was even worse than Ivan. Um, some people say, or I think everybody says it was a really bad storm for the Caribbean, and also for you, Nate. Passed really close to Jamaica as a Cat 4, and
Yep.
then hit um, the Yucatan as a Cat 2, and then Texas as a Cat 1, and actually a pretty quick rapid intensification kind of thing into very close to Houston, actually, a lot closer than what we all thought before. I remember the whole saga about whether or not this was going to go into Mexico or Texas, and this ends up going completely into very close to the Houston Metro. I think the Houston Metro got some of the eye wall, and they were bombarded with flooding rain and very strong winds, and I think in general, lots of people in the Houston Metro were caught off by surprise, um, with Beryl, and I just I don't know. There's something very ominous about Beryl. I think. What do you guys' opinion?
Yeah, you just feel like it's telling us something about peak season
Yeah,
because I mean over the course of Atlantic history, I think there's only been probably 3 or 4 other seasons with July majors, if I'm remembering correctly. And I think the calmest of those seasons was 2008, and that's still one of the most destructive seasons in history.
Right.
So, I mean, of course, we don't want to monger fear or anything, but when you really consider what's already happened, what the models have been hinting at literally all year, I mean, it's looking ominous. It's looking really ominous.
yeah. And also in terms of activity so far, we've only had, I guess, only three named storms, or I would say honestly, with the amount of activity we've had so far, I was expecting a little bit more in terms of named storms. To be completely honest, I thought we would
Same,
be
same,
around Ernesto by now, and 97L would probably be like Francine or the F storm or whatever. But we still had a
same.
major hurricane in the Caribbean, pretty significant, record breaking also for July too, at the very beginning of the month as well. But we've also had,
Right.
yeah, and this is something that I find really interesting is that so far our first three storms have all formed of deep tropical origin and have all tracked into the Gulf, formed or tracked into the Gulf at some point in their life, which I
Yep.
notice is very similar, yeah, to '05. Um, and obviously that year also had a Cat 5 in July too, and I just wonder what that means for the season going forward, especially as we get to the peak. Obviously, in terms of the overall early season, by now, '05 probably was on its eighth storm, I think, and this year we,
Yeah, had like I
yeah,
think had over 60 AC as well, because
yeah,
they got like that season had like 50 or so from just Emily and Dennis in
yeah,
July.
yeah. That they produced lots of ace. So we and also '05, you got to remember too, was two major hurricanes. So far, we've only had one. So I mean, we're not gonna be an '05 kind of season, but I still think this is definitely indicative that the rest of the season from here on out will probably be pretty active. Um,
Yep.
Probably get, yeah. And also the latest cancers from August came out too, and they seem to pretty hint at that pretty well also, which we'll go over in a few minutes as well. So that's a kind of a review of what we've had so far this season. Cat 5 barrel, three storms so far. What do I think, at least in terms of my predictions, for the season going forward? And that's kind of the whole point of why I wanted to do things tonight, obviously, besides 97L. So here's my predictions for the rest of the 2024 hurricane season. In total, I expect, because of how things have been so far, I expect will generally be around 19 to 22 named storms in our total 10 to 12 hurricanes and 5 to 7 major hurricanes, with my ace anywhere between 180 to potentially upwards of maybe even 230 ace points. And I definitely think that ace is not, I don't think that's too outlandish, especially given how much ace we've had so far, which is around 40 or 30, almost 40.
It's at 36 right now, which is the third highest of any season so far.
What's the second highest?
I think second highest is, hold on, let me check it real quick. 2008 with 38.
And then the first is 05.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Bertha contributed to majority of that in '08.
Right, yeah. So that's what I predict. If comparing that to what I predicted in June, I said up to potentially um mid 20s. I think 25 or 26 named storms was my high end. I lowered that for August because I believe the amount of activity we had in the early season, that we're kind of up at Chris now, which is still above normal. I think we're only supposed to get the third named storm sometime in August, sometime this month. So I
Yeah, I
think,
think the first week or so.
yeah, yeah, and obviously we're gonna get Debbie. So we're still gonna be above normal in named storms, and we'll probably definitely be quite a bit above normal still in terms of total named storms, but I think we're orienting more towards a quality kind of season.
Yeah.
Same, I agree.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts about that?
Nah, I think we'll probably have my prediction is like 20 storms, 12 hurricanes, and it depends on what Debbie does, a potential Debbie. I'm between 6 or 7 majors. I
Hmm.
don't really know. It's like if Debbie become a major, then I'm gonna say 7 majors. But for now, I'll say 6. 20, 12, 6 is my preseason prediction with Ace was 197. So I'm gonna keep that for now, but I'm not sure. But I'm gonna keep that for now.
Okay.
197 Ace.
Yeah. For my forecast right now, um I dropped my storm count by 1, so it's now 18 to 22. But I kept hurricanes at 10 to 13 and majors at 5 to 7. And I increased my ACE a little bit to a range of 190 to 230.
Right. Yeah. I think, yeah, the ace will probably be very high. And actually, that goes now to the landfalls too. Probably gonna see, more long track storms, I would assume. Um, that will probably produce more ace as well. And I still think we'll probably get to that I think it's very likely we'll get to the bottom hyperactive threshold, which is I think around 160 or 170 ace.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I still think we could still get to potentially top 8 or 7 ace, maybe top 5, but we'll really have to see lots of activity, I think, in August and September with ace storms. But I mean, we'll especially, I think that'll be really easy, achievable, if, things go exactly to my landfall prediction here, which is really a high risk that I will remain, because in June I had high risks all throughout basically the Western Atlantic entirely, including the Caribbean, including the Southern Caribbean too. I think I really hammered down the Southern Caribbean as well in June, and I think Danny, you can attest to that because you were here for the June when I did the June live stream.
Yeah.
Um, I really hammered down on the Southern Caribbean and the Yucatan Peninsula as well. I think that's an area that I think all of us were expecting, the Yucatan. Kind of shocked to see how early it panned out, but also the Western Gulf too. I pointed out Galveston, Houston. That also panned out I think that panned out so far with the hurricane landfall there. And all I'm gonna say is hurricane landfalls for the United States this year. I'd say expect at least three or four more hurricane landfalls for the rest of the season. It's looking pretty impactful for August, September, and maybe October. We'll see. But the Caribbean as a whole, not sure about, and this is going to seem very controversial, but not really sure about Eastern Florida right now. I kind of have Western Florida more as an area of concern for me, but I'm really not sure about Eastern Florida, especially because of how many times it was on the cards for Eastern Florida for the past few years, and we just didn't get much to go on at all. The only hurricane landfall we've had on the eastern coast of Florida in the last 20 years is Hurricane Nicole. Since '05 was
Yeah.
Hurricane Nicole, which was a quite literally borderline week cat one in November that hit eastern Florida. That's the only hurricane landfall we've had on the east coast of Florida so far. So it's possible that we might get one. Maybe we might get one after all. Maybe it might even be a major, but I'm just not so confident on it right now. So I have Eastern Florida in a moderate risk. Um, Generally north of the Carolinas into southern mid-Atlantic, that's a low risk because they don't really get much anyways. But New England, and this is actually interesting, but New England I think has a pretty elevated risk, especially come maybe later this month or September. I think something could come along. Maybe might not be strong. Maybe it might be strong. But I think something could come along. In an active hurricane season, New England gets a lot anyways, in terms of impacts, whether it's fully tropical or not. So that, already that's there. Bermuda, I also think could probably get something decent as well. They have been pretty often over the last several years, and also Atlantic Canada. And all the areas I just mentioned are my moderate risk areas. So what do you guys think about that?
What
I agree.
is what do forecasters normally look at when they try to estimate the risk for New England? Because I find it difficult to really point out how the risk would be increased or decreased. Um, with the mid-level ridges, mid-level troughs, they move throughout the subtropics and how they might interact with storms. Do you have any idea of what they tend to look at in that regard?
I think the default kind of factor is ENSO state.
So that would be like how it affects the subtropical jet sense.
I guess so, or kind of just looking at ENSO in years that East Coast impacts, especially New England impacts, did happen in, and kind of using that as a risk factor.
That's fair. That's fair. I
Um,
think New England has have they haven't been affected since unless I'm missing something, since Honey in 2021.
yeah,
I think.
in direct impact, yeah, but especially for interior Northeast and New York, and I guess you could say like generally mid Atlantic and Northeast as a whole. Ida, which was the remnant from what it was in the Gulf, but
Oh yeah, yeah.
still produced really really devastating effects, despite it being a remnant low in the Northeast, and that's why I kind of factor that in that we might get some sort of remnant low situation in the Northeast, but that probably could still cause lots of flooding rain in places in the Northeast, and that would still have a really big impact. So I have a moderate risk there, but in general, in active hurricane seasons, New England in general is just at a higher risk. So I include that this year. But I think the biggest area is the Gulf, Eastern Gulf, and Caribbean. I'd say
Fair enough.
especially in
Fair
the
enough.
Gulf, Western Florida should watch, and maybe Louisiana. We'll see. Late August is when it typically goes down, and also right now, right now in the next week, it's looking like it's going to go down there too. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Um, Danny,
Yes.
any other thoughts or?
Um, now I was just thinking about like the Northeast thing, like what an Ida like an Ida situation will count, right?
I'd say so. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'd say so.
because at the very least, that's what I could see. I could see something like that, even if it's not like a direct impact. Theoretically, I
Hmm.
could see something like that, like something from the Gulf or something like that that goes up the northeastern seaboard and does like impacts like that.
Right.
I could see something like that happen.
Right. All right. So that's my landfall for predictions for August, and these are my final predictions for the whole season. From now on, it's just gonna see is we're just a wait and see to what verifies and what doesn't. So we got the Atlantic out of the way. And I think this will probably be very much straightforward. But the Eastern Pacific, they've had a pretty, dead ass season. um, they've had a pretty, inactive season so far. And I think it's still probably going to be pretty not active. So I'd say from here on out, I think the total for this season will be 10 to 12 named storms, 4 to 5 hurricanes, and 1 to 3 major hurricanes. And really quickly, just to go over it, landfall areas. I'm sorry if this is a little lower quality than the Atlantic map because I had to screenshot this. Um, but I think the biggest impact for them will be um, central Mexico, right where I think maybe Baja to central Mexico, southern Mexico, and areas south of that. Maybe late season will probably they'll see something, but in terms of impacts. In general, for them in Mexico, I think it's going to be central to northern Mexico, closer towards the Baja. And then in June, I had a heightened risk for Hawaii because I thought that we would have something that, a more typical long track storm in the Pacific that we've been getting, or that's typical of the Pacific that at some point in late July, in July at least, we would typically get this long track system in the Eastern Pacific. And sometimes I think back especially to 2020 and even last year, we had heightened impacts and heightened risks to Hawaii. So I had a moderate risk in June for Hawaii. But since we've had basically nothing so far in the Pacific this year, except for a 3 week storm so far, even though Carlota is probably going to become decent over the next several days, I don't really see Hawaii as much anymore, so I don't really have much of a risk for them anymore. So I have a low chance. But it could still happen. Maybe this long track storm that I'm thinking of happens sometime this month and we see a heightened risk for Hawaii, but not really sure about it now. So that's my prediction for the Eastern Pacific. And that is my August predictions. With, both basins. What do you guys think? And then let's get into ENSO, which is what I want to do next. But before that, what do you guys think?
What was your predictions for the East Pack? Did you say like a numbers or I
Um,
didn't catch?
Let me really quickly bring it up again. Um, 10 to 12 named storms, 4 to 5 hurricanes, and 1 to 3 major hurricanes.
So funny because I was gonna say that my predictions were 11-5 too, bro. Almost the
Yeah,
exact same thing. I was gonna say that.
yeah. I think that's the
Um,
middle line of my predictions, basically.
Yeah.
All right,
I
Nate.
think, yeah, I think with the potential for a major or two this week with Carlotta and that AOI behind it. I think that three is um three majors is a fairly reasonable forecast right now, because like a couple of weeks ago I wouldn't have agreed with that theory. But it seems like the forcing in the epoch right now is going to give them a pretty good boost for the time being. But after August, I'm not sure I see much in terms of how they can have um solid activity. So I'm kind of leaning towards like a max of maybe 10 storms, because by next week they should have probably about 4 or 5 potentially. um and yeah, as I said, after August I don't really see um like a bright future in a sense.
Right.
With La Nina coming along, progressing a bit more than recently because it was stunted.
Yeah, and that's actually what I
The
want to talk about next, but finish your thought.
Yeah, yeah, and of course the Atlantic is still pretty warm, and La Nina forcing is pretty evident right now. So I mean, overall, I think a lot of activity that will take place in the EPAC this season is going to happen in the next 10 to 15 days.
Right. Yeah, and that's actually the next part I want to talk about, and we'll probably have to skim through this pretty quickly, even though I have a lot to bring up with it. But yeah, so La Nina, it's a pretty interesting thing because lots of the models this time were for this time of year we're expecting that we would have a very potent La Nina. And so far, especially by now, I think if we were to go back to April forecasts, the climate models were all saying that even by now we would potentially already be in a pretty potent Nina, and so far that has not really panned out.
Yeah. To be honest, when I saw the model predictions earlier in the season, I was thinking that they were probably a bit too aggressive with how they were depicting La Nina by peak season,
Hmm.
because I think most, if not all, the models were calling for like a moderate to strong Nina around September. I mean, moderate probably wasn't that unrealistic, but
Right.
it still seemed kind of quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, it still seemed kind of quick.
Right.
Um,
And just really quickly to bring up the latest and the weekly ENSO SST update, they have the Nino 3.4 at still positive zero point 0.1 Celsius. So I mean, I don't know. It's really interesting because I actually have this tweet for the CanSIPS model, which I was gonna bring up later, but I guess I'll bring it up now by World Climate Service. And by the time we were in August, they were already expecting that we would be in a moderate Nina from the February forecast, and
right.
even as recent, actually the March forecast, it was February 29th. Forgot that the forecast for each month runs the day before. But for the March forecast, as recent as the March and even April forecasts, there were the most recent April forecast was borderline moderate Nina. And right now, as of August, we're initializing at basically dead neutral. And if you want to go by the CPC weekly value, we're still at slightly leaning warm neutral. And that's a huge difference from already close to moderate Nina.
Yeah. Wait, which model or which suite were you saying is leaning to warm neutral right now?
Um, the
Okay,
weekly the weekly ENSO update. Um,
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
but
that's the current state. That's the current state.
yeah, the current state.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's fair.
yeah, the weekly SST thing is at still at 0.1 positive as of the latest weekly update. Probably get down to dead neutral next week. But my point is that the Cansips, as recent as the April forecast, was already thinking that by this time, basically into early August, that we would be in borderline moderate Nina, and we've not really been in a Nina at all. And I'm going to show you that with the SOI right now. I'm interesting that you brought up that we have like Nina forcing right now, but I don't know about that because the SOI is still not responding very Nina like at all. In fact, the latest SOI 30-day average is tipped down back to -7, and that actually
Mm,
is enough to say that the atmosphere is still slightly in El Nino ish.
mm. I wonder how reliable the SOI is in regards to talking about atmospheric forcing, because if you look at velocity potential over the past 30 days, it's pretty clear that there has been heavy sinking over the Eastern Atlantic and over the EPAC as well. And if you go to 90 days, it's the same thing. And when you consider things, um, with the EPAC having its most inactive season so far, it would be reasonable to think that Nina forcing is pretty evident on a global scale right now.
Yeah,
My opinion.
I suppose so, but definitely, and I actually did a tweet about this, I think a day or so ago. If anything, it actually seems to me that the Nina forcing is probably more in line with weak Nina forcing, more than moderate
Yeah,
Nina,
yeah,
than a moderate or strong Nina. And I'm actually trying to bring up that velocity potential map, but I can't seem to find it from
yeah,
cyclonic
yeah. I
weather.
agree. It's more of a weak Nina forcing right now.
Yeah.
Like what you typically see in like cool neutral or weak Nina seasons.
Right.
I mean, for the epoch, it is still possible that um a rising cell could form over the basin at some point this month, but it seems like the progression of La Nina is back on track. So I feel like the chances of that are being reduced slightly,
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion. But I think I think this month will be key to see how the second half of each season will go.
Yeah.
Because yeah,
Right. And I
because
just
if we do, oh yeah, go on.
yeah. Oh no. I was just gonna bring up though with the velocity potential. Um. Yeah. I do believe that you mentioned that we're kind of going back towards progressing with the ENSO getting cooler. And I've seen that with some of the daily updates to the sea surface temperatures anomalies by cyclonic weather. But I do want to mention that there is a kind of Kelvin wave, which is what's helping the Eastern Pacific get active right now. There is a Kelvin wave that is still moving through the Pacific, and at least with some of the models I saw, that is helping with the westerly wind bursts. And actually, I could answer that to what you said about how reliable the SOI is, because I think the SOI is probably more reflective of when we have easterly or westerly wind bursts rather than necessarily pinpointing long term um, atmospheric state in correlation to ENSO. You get what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I get you. I get you.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if I'm wondering if the SOY is more like oceanic related in a sense.
Right.
Because if that's the case, then I could understand what you said earlier. Um, because the velocity potential would be more indicative of the atmospheric state. Um, which over time should be coupled in a sense with the oceanic state. But of course, in a transition period, so that hasn't happened just yet.
Right. What do you think about this, Danny?
About all the Enzo things, I mean, honestly, for me, I'm not gonna lie. I honestly thought the La Nina would come in pretty quickly, like in like March or April. Well, about April. I mean, in February, March, I was thinking that, I honestly thought I was in the boat that maybe a strong La Nina would happen, but honestly, the most I could see it now is probably like a negative 0.6 or 0.7. Peaking like in December, November, December. But yeah, it's been very slow. Like the fact that the like you said, the Camp Sips model was showing like a moderate Nino almost by now. But yeah, we're not even in dead neutral supposedly, according to like the weekly, the thing you were saying about the weekly things. It's crazy, how kind of how slowly, like in the oceanatically, how slowly it's developed, or how long it's taking. But yeah, I don't
Yeah,
really see
yeah.
it developing that much until like November, December. That's when we see it like more pronounced. But I feel like it's gonna be just like a very slow decline overall for the next 2 or 3 months.
Right. And
We're gonna
actually,
see.
yeah, and actually, adding on to that, the Cansips, I have it up on the screen now for October. And if you guys are watching, if you guys have like a viewing of the stream, you could see the Cansips. It still looks like, honestly, leaning more neutral in October, even on the Cansips as of the latest run um than La Nina. And just to really quickly go again, compare it to what it had before in April, this is the comparison from quite literally this month's forecast for October to April. Look at how different it is in the Pacific. It's very interesting how much the models are really aggressive on this La Nina, and so far it is not panned out per se. Um, but I think, and it may sound like, I'm being a little pessimistic about the Atlantic, but it really does not have that much of an impact on the Atlantic because the Atlantic is still warm, and in reality, all we really need is just no El Nino, and that really helps favor the Atlantic quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah. Indeed.
hmm But yeah, you can see the comparison. Very interesting indeed that models are very the models were very over aggressive on this La Nina. And that's something I've taken to real note over the last several days. But in terms of how that affects the Atlantic, really does not affect the Atlantic that much, anyways, because this is the forecast for, and actually, I should get this for August, September, October, not just October, but the precipitation forecast. Here's the precipitation forecast for August, September, October in the Atlantic. And let me actually close this. And is this August? Yes, this is. This is the precipitation forecast and for the Cansips. And I actually got the one from April, not the one from this past month. Oh, stupid me. But I'm pretty sure you guys have all seen it by now. It's looking very active for the peak season. So I guess that goes to show.
Yeah.
So I think regardless, okay, here it is. Regardless, um, it's probably going to still be a very active season, even if we won't have a strong Nina like the models were indicating earlier in the year. And you can see this is the precipitation forecast by the Cansips. Very active through the deep tropics, very active through the Caribbean, and even active off the southeast too. And correlate that to the ridge forecast, very strong ridge over the northwest Atlantic near Atlantic Canada, trough near the Great Lakes. So I would imagine probably, especially if we're talking about threats from coming from the Caribbean, I would say possibly, once again, Eastern Central Gulf is my big target. But either way, this in general, um, taking away specific areas, very strong ridge over the northwestern Atlantic is certainly a very um, troubling signal, especially given the signature by the precipitation forecast, which looks very active. What this looks to me is that throughout the peak, probably going to see a very active peak and a very impactful one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this is one of those seasons where autumn um comes in pretty handy in terms of ACE because
Right.
I mean with the developing La Nina, well developing oceanic La Nina, we already have the atmospheric forcing. Um, it really just comes down to synoptic changes in the Atlantic itself,
Right.
like how steering is and all that. But the models seem pretty indicative of a potentially active late season, even after August and September, which already are looking to be pretty active.
Yeah. And to add on to this active thing, just to bring up really quickly, 2005, you could see the peak ENSO was weak, zero point 0.9 Celsius, and that is still weak Nina territory. 2017 as well, briefly negative one, but generally the La Nina in 2017 was weak. Um, and most importantly, in August, September, October, both of these years, look, in '05 and 2017, both of them were cold neutral, still only cold neutral, quote unquote, during the peak season in the Atlantic. So there's a lot of people that argue that cold neutral is actually the most favorable, or seems like these most active seasons tend to happen around cold neutrals. So maybe the question is that maybe is this kind of more helpful for the peak season instead of detrimental as you would think because the La Nina is not going to be as strong. I think what this means is that either way, I don't think it matters. Weak Nina, strong Nina, it's going to be active no matter what. And just really quickly, looking back at the sea surface temperature anomalies, man, it's warm. Like, look at this. Starting to see once again more widespread areas in the MDR of 2 degrees Celsius anomalies above normal. And you can only imagine what that'll do to help, especially with getting these long track systems that form in the MDR and produce lots of ACE. So I think it's going to be a
Yeah,
long peak
we've,
season.
we've already seen what it's done with Beryl.
Yeah,
I mean, it tracked over SSTs that were
Record.
the highest on record,
right.
and even still now there are areas in the Western MDR that are warmer than at any other point on record. So
Hmm.
honestly, I kind of fear for what's to come for the Eastern Caribbean
Right.
because seems to be a lot of um thermodynamic potential for systems to not just develop but intensify at a pretty quick rate during peak season.
Right.
I don't think they're done. Definitely not. Um,
Yeah.
nah, I'm worried for them in September. I don't know. I have a bad feeling about that Eastern Caribbean area in September. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Something bad. Yeah.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you. It's not looking good for that for the Caribbean and just in general the Western Atlantic. I think the pattern is pretty set in stone by now. It's probably going to be active and impactful. And please do not listen to anybody online that says that this season is going to completely bust. It's probably going to underachieve, the 2005-2020 forecast that I think almost everybody was kind of leaning towards at the beginning. It's definitely not going to be that kind of active this season. Definitely not at the pace that we're at right now. But either way, you really don't need too many named storms to have lots of quality and lots of long trackers and lots of major hurricanes. I think a season like 2004 or 1998 kind of illustrates that pretty well. Both seasons only had
Yeah.
14, 15 named storms, and they still had, in 1998, we had storms like George, which was really bad for the Caribbean. Um, '04, well, that's kind of self-explanatory what happened in '04 that year. Florida was bombarded by multiple major hurricanes, and we only had quote unquote 15 storms, which, I mean, it seems like only 15 now because the average is 14, but back then 15 was actually still very active. Um,
Yeah, quite a lot at the time. Yeah.
yeah. Um, So either way, even if I honestly I'll say this, even if we only end up with like let's say 18, 17, 19 storms, even if we don't crack 20 named storms this year, which I still think we will. Um but to the point that even the fact that we won't have '05, 2020 levels of activity, it's still going to be a very impactful and a very active peak season, and we're all probably going to look back on this season and say that it was a pretty active season no matter what by the time it's said and done, even if it's not going to be, crazy '05 2020 levels like we were all thinking, or lots of people I definitely know were thinking earlier in the season.
Yeah. Yep. Completely agree. Completely
Impact's gonna be
agree.
the thing I'm worried about the most this year. That's the one thing that, regardless of, I don't know, we're not '05 level, that I think the impacts are the one thing that are gonna be the same.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
'05 in terms of, like, the 250 ace that it had. Like
Hmm.
if it's 200, like I don't think it's gonna matter too much. Like the impacts, regardless, that are gonna happen are gonna be immense. That's the one thing. That's the one thing
Yeah.
Yeah,
that.
I agree.
Hmm.
I mean, with it still doesn't seem like the steering patterns are favoring a heavy OTA season. It still seems like there is great potential for a good number of land impacts, and that's pretty troubling when you've considered what has already happened in June and July with the first three storms. So
It all hit
yeah,
somewhere.
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh yeah,
All we can do is be prepared.
that's also true. Yeah, all the storms we've had so far have hit land. That's also true.
And
Um,
97 will
Yeah,
probably hit land too. I
yeah,
mean, it's almost 100% guaranteed.
yeah. It's almost certain at this point. Yeah,
yeah. And when was the last time we had something like that where the first few storms all hit land? Basically
that's
'05?
not. Yeah, that's a pretty good point to be honest. I think this may be the first season I'm tracking that has just land impact upon land impact to start the season.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, we've not
yeah,
had
I'm going to have
one.
to go back to the records, but
Yeah,
yeah,
we've not had one storm so far that has not hit land. So
the
that
next one
is,
seems likely to continue.
yep.
So
Hmm. But yeah, really quickly, actually going over the westerly wind burst thing in the Pacific. Um, at least in terms of activity right now with 97L, I'd say 97L is probably going to be the main thing we're going to watch for the next 2 weeks or so in the Atlantic. Looks like once again westerly wind bursts will probably get in the Pacific. So at least with La Nina, I'd say we'll probably be in a case again where La Nina development is kind of stunted for the next few weeks, and the Eastern Pacific will probably produce a good few named storms as well. Probably going to get maybe one or so major hurricane in the Eastern Pacific over the next few weeks, but um, it actually looks like trade winds in the Pacific return by the time we get to the end of the month, at least looking at the CFS. And let's actually switch over to the Atlantic now with the upper level 200 millibar wind. Um, Very favorable look as we end the month of August and head into September, at least with 200 millibar winds. And um, I think especially as we get towards the August 20th time period, I think around that time is the time that I'm really eyeing a big uptick of activity in the Atlantic.
Well,
Same.
that's the usual. That is the usual.
Yeah, yeah,
So
that is true actually. Yeah,
it
around the
actually it actually be funny if that time doesn't have a big uptick in activity.
yeah, I mean it is
You
true.
pretty much just
August,
expect it at this point.
yeah, probably give or take a few days around that date, but August 20th, I mean that's the window
Yeah.
anyways. And let me really quickly show the velocity potential. And the current Kelvin wave that moves through the Pacific will end up in the Atlantic by the time we get to the mid months, and looks like we'll probably be in the most favorable conditions. Um, Probably by the time we get to around the 15th or so. So yeah, I say around the 15th to 20th is I think the time we should start eyeing for our big uptick, looking into the
Right,
future.
right, right. Um, I'm looking at a map right now. I'm not sure which site you're using. I'm on the NCICS site. Um, with the one that shows the CFS forecast with the different intraseasonal forcing and the CCKW that's helping the EPAC with activity now. It
Hmm.
should get into the MDR in just about just over a week from now. And there's already some hints that that could help with the formation of a TC. I remember yesterday CMC was pretty close to showing something um around day 10,
Hmm.
and the EPS has been hinting at some kind of MDR signal on an intermediate level. It's not been anything that's solid because of course it's still a bit of a transition period, the next 10 to 15 days, while the EPAC likely has more activity. But as I think there's still the potential for something else to pop up probably sometime next week.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree. We'll probably get like two storms before like the ramp up for real happens. You know, like the late August
Yeah,
ramp. We'll probably get two storms. I say this one and then another one.
yeah.
yeah, that's what I'm thinking as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I'd say so. So yeah, other than that, I guess that's I guess that's all with, major things happening. By the way, I do wonder this. What was the last time we did have um our first landfall in the United States as a hurricane landfall? Because I just realized that that's basically what Beryl was.
Um.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Uh.
Um,
And,
well, let's see. It's definitely not been recent, I would think.
okay.
Um, let me see. 20.
Was it 19? Wait, was it? Because of Barry.
I'm wondering if it's 2019.
Oh yeah,
Because
it
it was Barry.
was. It was. You're right. You're right. Um,
Barry, yeah. Wait, actually, did it make landfall as a? Yeah, it did. It did.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Peaked. It made landfall
It
on peak
did.
intense.
yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
Barry is such a meme.
I was, bro.
I remember that storm. Crap.
Yeah, Barry is funny.
It's a
But I
bit.
mean, Surface Obs supported a hurricane, so
I
can't go against that.
guess he can't. Um,
Can't go against that at all.
yeah, but Beryl was definitely a more solid hurricane than Barry. That's for sure.
Yeah, by far. By far.
Yeah. Um, but that is very interesting. And certainly I think especially sometimes you just gotta look at the trends and loud honking outside. Apologize for that. But the trend is your friend, and I believe the trend so far with, major hurricane in early July, on July 1st, we had a Cat 5, quite literally. Um, and the fact that all of our storms so far have hit land, I think it says something about this season, and I think all signs, especially with 97L, which will probably continue the land impact streak with, our named storms. Um, I think all signs are a go for this peak season. From here on out, it's going to be an uphill battle.
Yeah.
So, with that being said, any final thoughts before we end?
It's unknown what's 97 else gonna do. Just keep watching everyone because like, we truly don't know what this is gonna do. It's just doing whatever it wants right now. So like every day is gonna be crucial watching this. There's no certainties with this at all. Like everybody in the peninsula, the panhandle, like even the Gulf of Mexico and off the Carolina has to keep watching like where the especially the flooding issue might be. That's the main. The wind is could be an issue too, but the flooding is what we're concerned about the most, and that's why we have to keep watching because it's not known where that's gonna be at. You gotta keep
Yeah.
watching.
Yeah.
Right. Um,
I agree. Just keep watch. Um, all of the southeastern U.S. states. Be prepared because there's really what do you say no a wide range of outcomes. Like this could still just be like a TS landfall for southern Florida, or it could be one of those out of nothing August systems that ends up hitting the US as a major. So
yeah.
yeah, just keep watching closely. Um, just ensure that you get your information from credible sources. Just overall be prepared. Don't underestimate this in any way.
Right. Yeah. I definitely agree. I agree for sure. Um, and we'll certainly be doing a lot more coverage on 97L over the next several days. Probably gonna do more live streams. I think I'm planning, if you guys are up for it, we'll obviously talk about it in private, but if you guys are up for it, maybe Saturday, um, another live stream on 97L specifically. Maybe we could do that. But I'll definitely be posting a lot here on YouTube, Twitter as well. And that reminds me, I forgot to put this live stream on Twitter. Um, but maybe we'll do that for the next time. But Twitter as well. In fact, Twitter is actually where you might catch me a little more than YouTube for now, because I'm only doing daily uploads on YouTube right now, once a day. But Twitter, I do more consistent things throughout the day, especially, as being able to put something out to the public. The moment something happens, it's very easy to do that in a tweet rather than make a 15, 20-minute video on it, right? So,
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
um, yeah, so it's much more easy to do that. So definitely catch me on Twitter too. And we'll see where, guys, we'll see where the Atlantic takes us over the next several weeks, because it's definitely gonna get interesting for sure. It's definitely gonna get
Yep.
interesting.
Yep. It's that time of year. So
And it definitely looks
yeah.
definitely looks like that kind of season too, if you know what I mean.
Right.
Yep.
Yep.
Totally agree.
All right. So I guess since we have all that laid out, I guess we're gonna end it off here for our live stream. Really hope you guys all enjoyed the live stream tonight. Pleasure to have you both, Danny and Nate, on as well. And definitely, hopefully, looking forward to doing this a lot more, especially as things get more active over the next several weeks, and the next several days as well. with 97L. So really enjoyed it and looking forward to doing this more. With that being said, stay safe to all of you. Peace, love, and kindness to you all. Watch the tropics, and we will talk again very, very soon. Bye-bye.
Later, yo.
It went really well. I liked how that went.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty good.